Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another episode on Magick Without Tears. Today we're going over Chapter 21, My Theory of Astrology. Let's begin. So right at the beginning, I'm going to start off by saying I use Sidereal Astrology, whereas Crowley used Tropical Astrology. The calculations differ in that Sidereal looks at what is really where in the sky, and Tropical basically runs on set dates. I personally don't use astrology for forecasting or making predictions, as Crowley will demonstrate momentarily that he does, because I feel that it is less astrology and more using a chart as a focal point for divination. So I use other methods of divination which work better for me. Now, to explain a little on why I use this sidereal astrology. Planets don't go in a perfect circle around the sun, but rather on an elliptical. And thus, right now, if you look at the sky, the planets are about 3 weeks off of the tropical schedule. So, in the case of divination, you might wonder how tropical can then sometimes be correct. And I'll address that momentarily in the example of a prediction Crowley writes about right at the beginning of the chapter. You might also ask, what then do I use astrology for, if I'm not making predictions, forecasting, or answering questions for people? Two things. First, to understand myself and my karma with the lens to analyze my situation based on my birth chart. Secondly, to look at current transits, that's what's happening in the sky right now, and to ride the energetic currents as they happened. I might even use that to plot out a specific magical ritual or operation or what have you, based on what astrology is happening now or what is about to happen, say in the weeks or months to come. I might set a date based on astrology that is sympathetic to the type of magic that I want to do. Besides that, if you ask 100 astrologers about the specifics of astrology, you're going to get 100 different systems in response. Now, whether a person is right or wrong does not matter to the science. What does matter is their results. If an astrologer is wrong in their readings, it is less the fault of astrology, and in my opinion, it's all on the shoulders of the astrologer themselves. So a lot of people like to discredit, oh, this person uses astrology, but they've made so many wrong predictions. Well, that's on them. That's not on astrology. That's like if I'm using a power tool or something and I use it wrong, the tool might be fine. It might be me that's using it wrong. And that's why whatever I did with it came out messed up, right? So before diving into this chapter, I'm going to give you my primer on astrology. This is by no means definitive, and a lot more can and will be said. In fact, the next chapter of Magick Without Tears goes into further on astrology in a more specific manner. So, I'd highly recommend Introduction to Sidereal Astrology by Kenneth Bowers if you're a beginner. And linked below is a PDF of Eshelman's Sidereal Mundane Astrology and his Sol Lunars forum, where you can get a lot of information about how to make predictions, and just on the website is like a lot of general information about how to read charts, what the planets mean, what the houses are, what the signs mean, how they interrelate, and if this planet's in this sign in this house, what does that mean? So you can find a lot on that website. So my pointers. Your own natal chart is your best friend. It is a roadmap to your karma and character influences. The ascendant on the middle left is east, where the sun rises. That's actually due east. That is one of the most important traits you will possess, as are your sun and moon placements. Sun, again, is your main character, and the moon your emotional influences. Any planets on the ascendant, midheaven, imum coeli, and descendant are highly influential and have more power in a chart. When a planet is at one of these positions, at the very top, at the very bottom, very left, or very right of the chart, at AC, DC, IC, MC, that's called angular. So you look at these first because they have the most power and influence in your personality, in your karma, whatever the planet is. The descendant, which is the right side, is what you seek in others and your relationships. The IC is your home or private life, And the MC, or midheaven, is mostly your work and career related stuff. Next, you're going to look at trines and squares. Trines are when planets are 120 degrees apart, and squares are 90 degrees apart. Trines have an easier relationship when planets interact, and squares make the planetary interactions more challenging. What I must stress is for you to look at your north and south lunar node placements. The north node is what you are going to seek very heavily, and your karma coming in upon this lifetime. The south node is exactly opposite of the north node on the chart. The south node is your past karma, where you're coming from. It could be past lives or earlier in this life or early life experiences that basically dictate what your levels of comfort are, which, while not always bad, are generally things or places you withdraw to for comfort and things you are less likely to grow from engaging because you've already had those experiences. These things can be made positive. If you need a break, right, you go to these outlets. But at the same time, they could also be devastating because you might always retreat there whenever the going gets tough, and then you don't grow. I would highly recommend a channel, Sam Jeppy, on YouTube, and his videos where he outlines the north and south nodes in all 12 houses. I have a link to his channel below where you could look up his name and type Rahu and Ketu, which is Rahu is the head of the demon and Ketu is the body of the demon. There's a whole mythology there I'm not going to get into right now. It would be like a video on its own, so coming from Hindu mythology. But Rahu, the head, is the north node, Ketu is the body, and it's the south node. So you could find videos on where your placements are in your chart, and then he gives really good explanations of what that means. Speaking of houses, every planet will be located in a zodiac sign, and both the sign and planet correspond with one of the 12 houses in the natal chart. These all influence the planet, and if there is no planet, the house influences the sign. There is no time in this primer to explain all 12 houses, nor the signs, nor planets in their totality, and all of their meanings, but here at least I can mention that you should look up your chart and analyze each planet, what house and sign it is in, and what it interacts with or aspects by trines and squares, conjunctions and oppositions. Conjunctions are when planets are within 3 degrees of each other. Oppositions is when planets are exactly on the opposite side of the chart from one another. Conjunctions really enhance the planet. Oppositions create a kind of, I don't want to say friction, but challenge between these two planets when they're in opposition. When you look at a planet in your chart, also look at what is happening in the house exactly opposite. So think if you have, like, I don't know, Venus in the 8th house or something. Well, that's also being influenced by whatever's on the opposite side of the chart. So depending on what sign it is, let's say you have Venus in Leo in the 8th house, well then you have Aquarius in the 2nd house. And thus, Aquarius is going to somehow affect that Leo-Venus 8th house aspect. Or, if you look at a present day chart, let's say Mars is in Capricorn in the 4th house. Well, also look at what Mars was doing in your chart when you were born, as well as where Capricorn is in your chart, because Mars is going to affect the house that Capricorn is in your birth chart, personally for you. And this happens all the time. Wherever a planet is, those planets in those houses are affecting the houses in your chart that they were in when you were born, basically where your natal chart is. So that's going to tell you a lot about what's influencing you at present. There are also retrogrades and returns to consider. A retrograde is when a planet, due to its position around the sun in proximity to where we view it on Earth, that planet appears to be moving backwards some several degrees before moving forward again. And this is just because the curvature of the sun and basically the orbits that we're on, it makes planets appear like they're going backwards through the constellation. When that happens, this makes the intensity of the planet enhanced. Mercury tends to be the most notable one because of its popularity in making communication and technology difficult to work with. Returns are when a planet in the sky is at the same degree in the same sign as when you were born. Saturn is the popular one you'll hear a lot about, and that one usually forces a person to grow up and make changes they've neglected based on what house it's in and what sign it's in their chart. Saturn is a teacher, and a harsh one at that, so it's like you either get the lesson or it kind of pulverizes you a bit. The last thing I'll mention before starting the chapter is dasas. I'll link a website below where you can punch in your information and see what planet and subplanet you were born under. The dasa system is basically a series of the planets, including Ketu and Rahu, the north and south lunar nodes, and subplanets. So let's just say we were born in like a Mercury planet and then a subplanet of Moon. You're going to go through the rest of the cycle, and then the next one would be probably Venus, and then Mars and Jupiter, so on and so forth. So they kind of go in that order, and you'll go through these subdivisions. I guarantee if you take a look at these transitions from one subplanet to the next one, you will see life changes corresponding with the nature of the changes in your life based on what planet and subplanet was going from one to the next. So you can Google dasas for more information about what they are and how they're calculated, but there's the links. You could at least take a look at what your dasa system is and see what planet was I born under, what subplanet, and take a look, investigate as a scientist, see was there any, Mars type things happening in your life when you transition from one planet into the next one, which happened to be Mars or something like that. Take a look at what was going on in your life, see if there's a correspondence there. So those are the very basics. I also highly recommend Vedic astrology, but one thing at a time. So let's see what Crowley has to say. Quote, Karasor, a few well-chosen words about astrology? Madame, I am only too happy to oblige. Our aim is to serve. The customer is usually wrong, but statistics indicate that it doesn't pay to tell him so. It seems a long while since I set up your nativity and read it, but it is very clear in my mind that you were astonished, as so many others have been, by the simplicity and correctness of my reading. It began, you remember, by your giving me the usual data, where we dropped in for tea at the Angler's Rest. I calculated the ascendant on the spot and remarked rubbish. I looked at you again very carefully, and after many grunts observed, more likely 10:30, with an hour one way or the other. You insisted, I insisted. Unwilling to make a fracas in the inn, we decided to put you to the trouble of writing to your mother to settle the dispute. Back came the answer. Within a few minutes of 11, I remember because your father had hung on as long as he could. He had to take the morning service. End quote. Two things. If someone you respect reads your natal chart, just be careful of simply agreeing with their analysis. People are often influenced by others' opinions of themselves and can run the habit of then trying to behave in a manner influenced by that reading. Also, we have many sides to our personality, so while they might say you have this and this and this, you might have minor traits which now you feel like, oh yeah, I do have that, but maybe that's like a minor thing that you have when really you have is that, and that, which are actually more enhanced, but they're not seeing it when they're giving an opinion of you because you don't really show that, but that is your personality. Basically, think critically and analyze yourself when possible, and don't behave in any way that isn't true to yourself. If you don't know who that is yet, spend all your energy trying to figure it out. Astrology is useful for that if you do it. And now for the forecast about her father. If he's using tropical astrology, how can he be correct making whatever he said that happened to, yes, in fact, be confirmed by her mother, when I am sitting here on this recording claiming sidereal I find more accurate? Well, that depends on the situation. I don't know what was asked about her father, if he was going to work, because it seemed like he had to take the morning service, or if he was in hospice and died. I'm going to assume that her father was passing away, just based on the choice wording. So he could have seen Crowley could have seen Saturn in Pisces, when really Saturn was in Aquarius. And well, those could both do it. The house placement would be the same. So if he saw 11 a.m. the next morning, Saturn would be in the 8th house. and if he knew the father was in hospice, he most likely intuited that the time was near, and while meditating on the chart as a focal point, caught a vision which made the prediction. There are many combinations of planets, signs, and houses that can fall with many overlapping ideas, right? Sun in Leo in the first or fifth house can be a very happy person. The query, the method, and the specifics all have to be taken into account. My partner once told me of a woman who knew nothing about the specifics of astrology, but she would lay her hands on a natal chart, meditate, however she would, and would channel the information as if she was analyzing the chart. So in such a case, even without any information or with wrong information, a person with intense divination skills might still pull the right information from a chart by simply using the chart as a scrying mirror or deck of cards or whatnot. Well, to continue with the chapter, quote, "This occurrence is very common in my experience. I have contradicted what sounded like ascertained fact and proved on inquiry to have been right. So, considering the statistics I made many years ago, showed me to have been right 109 out of 120 times. I think two things are fairly near probation. Firstly, I am not guessing. That doesn't matter much. But secondly, which is of supreme importance, there is a definite connection between the personal appearance and manner of the native and the sign of the zodiac which was rising when he first drew air into his lungs. Let me add, to strengthen the argument, that on a few occasions where I have erred, there has been good astrological reason for it. Example, I might plump for Pisces rising when it was actually Capricornus. But in that case, Saturn would have been afflicted by being in Cancer, with bad aspects from Venus and the Moon, thus taking away all his rugged, male, laborious qualities, and in the ascendant might have been Jupiter, suggesting many of the qualities of Pisces, and so forth." End quote. As I said earlier, there are many factors to take into account, and when making a prediction or forecasting based on astrology, it might be that in some case, tropical or sidereal would give the same reading. But I stand by sidereal, and when it comes to analyzing one's own life, personality, and karma, I find sidereal to be much more reliable. I'll use myself as an example. Tropically, I'm a Virgo with a Virgo rising and a moon in Taurus. Sidereally, I'm a Leo with a Leo rising and moon in Aries. The fiery aspects make much more sense to me, as I have a quick temper when aroused, generally playful nature, and am very energetic generally. Virgos are extremely analytic. Leos are sure of themselves, and with an Aries moon, I move fast juggling projects, which I look at as pieces on a chessboard. So to be a Taurus who takes their time with things does not make sense to me, as I'm not slow in that sense, and not to say slow-witted or anything, but Tauruses move at a very kind of casual pace generally. If I have an analytical nature, it stems from having Mars in the first house in Virgo, a very strategic mind. Even making content on the Lima, for me, it's less about organizing information, and if you notice, I focus 93% on practical aspects as opposed to historical or scholarly. I'm always trying to tell people to use ritual, to use meditation. I'm not just trying to give people information so that you could hoard it. I'm trying to give you information so you could practice with it. So Virgos, well, yes, I'm sure there are many Virgos who do practice. Crowley was a sidereal Virgo who practiced his ass off. But in general, the fiery aspect makes more sense to me in my approach to everything. Going, go, go, go. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. To continue with the chapter, Crowley will give his own pointers on using astrology yourself. Quote, "Now let me start. You want me to explain the system which I use. I do not move in a mysterious way my wonders to perform, for nothing could be simpler. For its origin, I have to thank Abramelin the Mage, who empties the vials of his scorn upon the astrologers of his time, with their meticulous calculations of the hours of the planets and so on. I think he goes too far when he says that a planet can have no influence at all, or very little, unless it is above the horizon. But he meant well, bless him." End quote. So Crowley is funny here. He says, quote, "Move in a mysterious way my wonders to perform," end quote, which is from a hymn by William Cowper, a British poet and hymn writer. The original verse is, God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. So Crowley's equating himself with God through this poetry. Just goes right in line with Liber Oz. There is no God but man. Every person is a God unto themselves. We're all stemming from the Ein Sof, so we're all part of that thing, or non-thing, or thing that words don't describe. Regarding Abramelin not using planets beyond the horizon, Crowley is referencing chapter 6 of book 2 of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, quote, "Oh, how gross an error! Hear and tell me, when it is that a planet hath the greatest force in the elements, whether when it is above or when it is below your horizon or hemisphere. We must, however, avow that it is more powerful when it is above, because being below it hath no power save according to the will of God. Why then, even further than this, should we attribute unto a planet a day and hour, if during the whole period of such day it appeareth not above the horizon?" End quote. I also strongly disagree. To say a planet has no influence in the natal chart is absurd. And I think this is more a hang-up with the concept of darkness in general, as if night is a more stifled energy. It's not at all. It's just different than daylight, but it's still very powerful. You know, Scorpio is like the night side of Mars, so to think like nighttime or the upper half of the chart has no power if you look at a transit, it's absurd. So that's my opinion as well. I agree with Crowley. To continue, quote, "Modern astrologers multiply their charts until their desks remind me of a bargain basement in the rush hour. They compare and contrast until they are bad-eyed, bewilderment, bemused. And when the answer turns out absolutely false, exclaim with a shout, 'By Ptolemy! I forgot to look at the last lunation for Budapest.' But then they can always find something or other which will explain how they came to go wrong. Naturally, when you have several hundred factors, helplessly bound and gagged, it would be just too bad if you couldn't pick out one to serve your turn, after the event. No, dear girl, it should be obvious to an unweaned brat. They can't see the wood for the trees. They are using the ruach on a proposition which demands neshchama. Intellect is quite inadequate. The problem requires mother wit, intuition, understanding. Here is my system in a number 000 ampoule. Put up the figure at birth, study it, make notes of the aspects and dignities, concentrate, and turn on the magical tap." End quote. So as I said earlier, for Crowley, astrology is about intuition and not merely looking at the analytical information on a page. As for my opinion, you need to be able to do both. Yes, you should be able to analyze a chart intellectually, know every bit of information, even if you need reference books to help or whatnot. But you should also be able to pull information out of the chart by sheer intuition upon gazing at it for a few moments. Quote, "Occasionally, when I began, I set up the proposed figure to see how the patient was doing this week, but it never seemed to help enough to compensate for the distraction caused by the complication. What I do observe to examine the situation of today is transits. These I have found very reliable, but even with these, I usually ignore aspects of minor importance. Truth to tell, conjunctions mean very much more than the rest put together." End quote. So transits are how the current planetary positions correspond with any given natal chart. A person's sun or moon or Mars or Neptune can be conjunct, in opposition, trine, or squaring a present time planet or sign, and this will determine a great deal about what is going on with them. Quote, "Talking of aspects, I think it ridiculous to allow vast orbits like 15 degrees for Luna and 12 degrees for Sol. Astrologers go to extreme lengths to calculate the solar revolution figure not to a degree, not to a minute, but to a second, and that when they don't know the exact time of birth within half an hour or more. Talk about straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel. Then what does an hour or so matter anyway if you're going to allow an aspect, whether it is 2 degrees or 10 degrees off? This, even with delicate aspects like the quintile or semi-sextile. What would you think of a doctor who had a special thermometer made to register -1 out of 100 of a degree, and never took notice of the fact that the patient had just swallowed a cup full of scalding hot tea?" End quote. So, you can be very meticulous with the chart. You could always see that a planet is in X number degree and X number apostrophe. The degree is based on the 30-degree house, and the apostrophe is how many astrological minutes of the degree of that hour. So we're not talking about a 60-minute hour like a clock. We're simply breaking down each individual degree into 60 parts. And yes, you can technically look at every minute and find a meaning, but that generally is not necessary. The degree itself suffices in 99.9% of all astrology. Even the Vedics generally only break down a zodiac sign into 2 or 3 nakshatra or lunar mansions, but that also is a topic for another time perhaps. Generally just looking at, okay, is this, you might even look at the decan, which we'll talk about decans in a moment, where you break down each sign into 3 parts. So you could look at which part of that sign this planet is in. Is it 0 to 10 degrees, 11 to 20, or 21 to 30 degrees of that particular sign? That'll tell you more than enough that you need to know about what that planet is doing in that sign. You don't need to go look at the exact minute. So that's where you'll see the degree number and then a number with an apostrophe. That number with the apostrophe is how many minutes of that degree until it goes to the next degree of that sign. You don't really necessarily need to look at that. That's just for calculations. What Crowley is saying, and I agree with, is that you focus more on the sign and house of the planet than you ever will on the specific degree of that sign. The minutes are more just for keeping a time frame of transitions from houses and signs than they are for noting the extremely specific placement of the planet. Quote, in my own work, I disallow a deviation of 5 degrees or 6 degrees from the exact aspect, unless there is some alien reason for thinking that it is actually operative. With the minor aspects, I dislike reckoning with them if they're even 3 degrees away. Nor do I see any sense in marking the odd minutes in the ascendant, when one is not even sure of the decan, end quote. What he is saying is that if a planet is more than 5 degrees from being a proper aspect, say a planet is 95 degrees, which is just over 3 houses away, then it isn't worth noting as interacting with another planet as a square. And anything more than 3 degrees is not considered conjunct with another planet. So here he mentions decans. In the Golden Dawn, they did a lot of work marking the decans with tarot associations. And that's all discussed in the Book of Thoth, as well as Liber 78 by Crowley and Liber Theta, published by Eshelman. Decans are 36 10-degree divisions of the 12 zodiac. To these are attributed the 36 number cards, excluding the aces, which correspond with the entire sign of their element. So aces of wands would correspond with Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, for example. So if you're born at 12th degree Cancer, the corresponding card, which the decan would be, 12 degrees of Cancer would be the 3 of Cups, abundance, which rules 10 degrees to 20 degrees of Cancer. The 3 of Cups, this card is Mercury in Cancer, and a full reading of that card can be found in the Book of Thoth. Quote, the card is referred to the influence of Mercury in Cancer. This carries further above the above thesis. Mercury is the will or word of the All-Father. Here its influence descends upon the most receptive of the signs. At the same time, the combination of these forms of energy brings in the possibility of somewhat mysterious ideas. The number 3 is Binah, the great sea, is the moon in one aspect, but Saturn in another. And Mercury, besides being the word or will of the All-One, is the guide of the souls of the dead. This card requires great subtlety of interpretation. The pomegranate was the fruit which Persephone ate in the realms of Pluto, thereby enabling him to hold her in the lower world, even after the most powerful influence had been brought to bear. The lesson seems to be that the good things in life, although enjoyed, should be distrusted. End quote. All things of an earthly nature are transitory. So even though the card's called abundance and it looks very happy and, oh, I have a lot, all these things are physical, earthly, and they're thus transitory. Also, Mercury is a trickster in a certain sense. The magus liberates through their word, which is also the casting of the illusion so that that word can operate. So very tricksy little sign. So that 12 degrees of Cancer would correspond with the 3 of Cups, abundance, and that would be the proper reading of that decan. If you're looking at a current transits of present time, if a particular planet catches your interest, you might look at the decans and tarot correspondence for a deeper reading. Most especially important is your sun, where your sun is, what decan it is, and what the tarot card corresponding with it means, because that's going to have a big influence upon your life, personality, karma, etc. The court cards correspond with 30-degree segments, save the princesses, which rule an entire 90-degree segment. So if you look at your screen, you'll have been seeing this image, and you'll see the decans with princess quadrants. Just note that the dates on this image are tropical. I found the image online because I don't want to take the time to cast my own circle and draw all of these little segments. It's a lot of time that I don't have at the moment to actually do that. So I found this image online. So those are tropical dates. Basically, each sign goes by degrees rather than dates in sidereal. So just keep that in mind. Those dates are not important to sidereal astrology. What's important is the degree segments. The princesses are placed according to the fixed signs, as the signs begin from Aries as the ruler of the first house, ending with Pisces, the ruler of the 12th house. So Taurus is the fixed sign in the first quadrant and corresponds with the Princess of Discs. Aquarius rules the 11th house, so the Princess of Swords corresponds with the 12th, 11th, and 10th house quadrant. Then Cups with Scorpio, then Wands with Leo. Yod He Vav He, essentially. Back to the chapter. Quote, "That seems to be about all that is necessary for my morning heat. Suppose we go on to the question of interpretation. Thousands of books have been written on astrology. Nobody could possibly read them all thoroughly, and he would be a great fool to try. But he may do little harm by going into them far enough to observe that hardly any half-dozen are agreed, even on the foundations of their system, hardly any two upon the meaning of any given aspect, dignity, or position. There is not always agreement, even upon what questions pertain to which houses." End quote. I'll keep this fairly simple. I use a geocentric, that means earth-centric, using the whole earth, and I use a Fagan-Bradley sidereal arrangement with equal house sizes. Some charts you'll see the houses are different sizes. I use equal size houses, and Fagan-Bradley with the geocentric. There's also heliocentric that calculates astrology charts based on positioning of the sun as the center of that chart, but I feel we're on Earth, so why am I casting a chart which is, many, many, many miles away from where I'm actually am and where I want to know what that chart is doing here. So I use geocentric, Fagan-Bradley, equal-sized houses. For my interpretation of the house, I follow the ruler's general correspondences of that house. So Aries would be the first house, and Aries is personality. Then Taurus is the second house, home life. Gemini is the third house, intellect, education, things very mercurial and of those sorts, and so on. Quote, "There are a few completely quack systems, such as those which mix up the science with Toshosophical hypotheses." He's saying theosophical, but it's kind of his slur for Annie Besant's form of theosophy for some reason. There's a footnote about it, but Toshosophical, so he's just being snarky a little bit. Naturally, you discard these. Snarky bitch, I love it. But even of generally acceptable forms of astrology, such as mundane and horary, I tend to be distrustful. I ask, for instance, why, if Taurus rules Poland and Ireland, as is no doubt the case, the crash and massacres of 1939 and later in the one did not take place in the other. All the seaports of the world naturally come under one of the three watery signs, but we do not find that an affliction of Pisces which hits Tunis should do harm to all the other harbors similarly ruled." End quote. So I'm drawn to agree somewhat with Crowley in that I don't use mundane or horary astrology. Mundane predicts world events such as politics or natural disasters. Horary astrology is used to answer specific questions. Like I said earlier, I tend to just look at what energies are present and ride the currents and possibly know what parts of myself will be most fragile, influenced, or well positioned to work on for growth or for something specific. But I am certain that you can do such things with astrology. I've seen it. I appreciate it. After all, one aspect of astrology is that it is a divination compatible system, but that's just not my calling. I tend to use other forms of divination, so I don't rely on astrology for that. Crowley goes on to speak about the lack of corresponding information amongst charts using death as an example. The very same thing can be said of births. No two people born at the same minute are going to be exactly alike, yet they would have the very same natal chart. Does this then discredit astrology? Quote, "This brings us to the first big jump in the steeplechase of the whole science. We hear of thousands of people being killed at the same time within an hour or two, perhaps a minute or two, by earthquake, shipwreck, explosion, battle, or other form of violence. Was the horoscope of every one of the victims marked with the probability of some such end? I have known very strange cases of coincidence, but not to that extent. The answer, I believe, is manifold. It might be, for example, that Poland and Ireland are ruled by different degrees of Taurus, and that there are major and minor figures, the former ruling the latter, so that the figure of the launching of the Titanic swallowed up the nativities of the victims of her wreck. Something of this sort is really an obvious truth. Flood in China, famine in India, pestilence anywhere, evidently depend on maps of a scale far more enormous than the personal." End quote. So what he's saying is that astrological aspects rule parts of the planets. In the urn, he says New York City is a very mercurial place because of commerce, because of travel, because of communications, all of commerce, trade, all of those aspects. Even thievery is very common in New York City. So New York is ruled by Mercury. So I could see the planet having specific locations that are ruled by planets, zodiac, etc. So the nativity of that actual place, which also, like, if you look at the signing of the Declaration, 1776, July 4th, if you looked at the exact time that that Constitution was signed, that could be considered the birth of a nation. There's a birth chart for that nation of the USA. Any nation, once it was founded, has a birth chart. So being that that nation place is enormous, it could then consume the nativities of the individual people. Same thing with the Titanic. That could have a natal chart. It could have a natal chart from when it set out. It could also have a natal chart from the day that the Titanic was created. And because this is the thing that encompasses so many people, its astrology dwarfs the people on it. Now, whether this discredits astrology because of the actual multiple people in their different charts, or in the case of birth, why two people aren't exactly the same if they have the exact same natal charts, born a second apart from each other, or at the same exact second. So my answer is, geographically and karmically, no two individuals are alike, yet they may have the same forces prominent in their lives. It is the very same thing as two people next to each other looking at the moon. What they see and describe is exactly the same, yet the actual experience of seeing it is from a fraction of a degree difference in geographical perspective. And should they then trade spots, many movements would have occurred in their experience, and their experiences are still different because of that movement of the Earth and the moon, as they're gazing upon it and then re-describing it. So it's still different than the others was just a moment before. So you always have to think of time and space, karma, etc. Quote, "Then on this point, I feel reasonably sure, there may be one or more factors of which we know nothing at all, by the very basic possibilities of a figure are set to work, just as a car with engine running will not start until the clutch is put in. I will conclude by announcing a rather remarkable position." End quote. So here Crowley gives 3 points, and I'm just going to make 2 comments, so I'll break off after the first point and then after the final points. Point 1, quote, I see no objection at all to postulating that certain rays or other means of transmitting a peculiar form or forms of energy may reach us from the other parts of the solar system. For we can in fact point to perfectly analogous phenomena in the discoveries of the last 100 years or so, but that is no more than a postulate, end quote. So I understand energies, I work with energies. I know planetary energies. I know zodiacal energies. I know deity type, the way that certain deities feel that I've worked with repeatedly. And I also understand that stars and planets are but symbols which represent these energies and are perceptible to the sensory world of mankind. So Jupiter in the sky, the sun in the sky is a symbol. The sun in the sky is a symbol for Kether. It's the manifestation of the light, as we call it, which manifested as this, spewing forth of photons to give life to Earth, right? So it's a symbol. Even though it's a physical thing, it's also a symbol. When a layman asks, how can I believe in astrology, I often don't explain anything specific about energy or astrology, but I will tell them, doesn't the moon affect water on Earth? And since we're 75% water, doesn't that affect our moods and thinking? Why then shouldn't the magnetic influences of other planets revolving around our sun also influence some aspect of life here on Earth, even in such a mundane manner? And that usually ends the conversation. They're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. Yeah, why wouldn't the rotations of these big hulking things affect the way I'm feeling at a given time? So, and that usually ends it. Point 2, quote, the objections to astrology, as such, indicated by what I have already pointed out, and several others, would suffice to place me amongst the most arrogant disbelievers in the whole study, were it not for what follows. End quote. I just want to say one coincidence means nothing. Now, 100 in a row are noteworthy. That has been my experience with magic and astrology. And point 3, quote, the facts with regard to the ascendant are so patent, so undeniable, and so inexplicable without the postulate in point 1, the energies, that I am utterly convinced of the fundamental truth of the basic principles of the science. End quote. Love is the law, love under will. I'll catch you all in the next one.